This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hey there, welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and I am truly so excited to introduce today's guest before we jump into our conversation. I have been looking forward to having her on the podcast for a very long time now, and I consider her a very dear friend in this grief space we all find ourselves in. And today we are talking with Emily Bingham. She is a certified grief educator and spiritual life coach and a published author. We get all into her book in this conversation as well. And after her 32-year-old husband's death in 2019, Emily started her company called Move Through to empower grievers to rebuild their lives after loss and live fully again through transformative coaching and retreats. And as with so many guests here, Emily and I found each other through the Instagram gods. And Emily's content has always just really spoken to me and resonated with the message that I have not only at Losses Become Gains, but here on the podcast as well. And that's just, again, to really empower you to live a beautiful and peaceful life with grief. And today in this conversation, we are talking about all of that and the many, many nuances that come along with that. But not only that, what's really cool about Emily is her and I went through the same certification program to become a soul purpose and spiritual life coach. And we really just got even more connected through that experience. And just the way that she speaks about grief and her experiences and life after loss is just very much aligned with mine. And I'm just so thrilled for you guys to hear this conversation. There are so many big and amazing aha moments and things that Emily says here in this episode that I know is going to shift the way that you feel today and hopefully shift the way that you begin to feel and view your grief. And this is really just such a special conversation that I can't wait to share with you. So I'm so excited to dig into this one with you all. I have no doubt you are going to feel so empowered and so uplifted coming out of this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Emily, welcome to the Life with Grief podcast. I am so thrilled to have you here today. I feel like this conversation has been a long time coming.
Yes. Yes.
And like so many of the guests here, we were brought together, I would say like via Instagram, but we're also very connected because you and I went through a same certification course together to become soul purpose coaches. And it was so cool, you guys. Like when I saw, I didn't really know anybody obviously in this group. And then I saw Emily's name in our Zoom meetings. I was like, I know you. And then, just got connected. But I feel like we were both very drawn to that certification for a reason. And we're both obviously very much like in this grief space. But I feel like where you and I are very similar and also really connected is the life after loss and what that looks like and what that means and all the complexities that come with that. So we're definitely, because I was just joking to her before coming on, like there's so many different directions we could go with this conversation today. So really the overarching goal for today is I really want to focus on you and your story and your experience with loss. And then we have your fun little book to talk about, which is like there's so many aspects to it that I love. It is such a beautiful, like gentle guide for people who are grieving, but then you share these beautiful pieces of your story and, just your vulnerability in this. So I definitely want to get to your book. So that'll sort of be the focus of today's conversation. But I just wanted to welcome. I'm so excited to get into this.
Thank you so much, Tara. I am so glad that we made it work with our crazy schedules, and I'm excited to dive in with you. Yes.
Yes. Me too. All right. So first, let's just start off with like, who you are. I always used to joke like this, like, who are you kind of outside of your story of grief and loss, but that is so intertwined, in fact. So, but just also, I just love to have people get to know you. Any fun facts, things you like to do in your spare time, like just who is the
Yeah.
essence of Emily?
I love that because I feel like sometimes after a loss, you get so defined by your story. And especially if you're out there talking about it all the time, it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
who am I beyond Emily, the widow, Emily, the
Yeah,
grief coach? So thank you for that.
yeah.
Um, but my name's Emily. I live here in Denver, Colorado with my two kids who are now 6 and 8. I also just moved in with my partner and his two teenage boys, which has been a whole new journey.
Chaos.
But we're all living together as a blended family of 6 here.
Oh.
I love the outdoors, hiking, nature, being on water, any like lakes and rivers I can get into, paddleboarding. Big on fitness, work out every day, and I like get after it. I like a good physical challenge, love music, dancing. And right now I'm just really enjoying being at home with my kids, being a mom, trying to like re-engage with old friends, and I'm really deep into like my spiritual journey right now. So that's kind of Emily in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. Girl, same. I feel like this has just been such a transformative year. I think for so many people, I feel like people are like starting to wake up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like between like clients I have or like just people on social media, like, I feel like there is this want and this need for like, who am I? What is my, I don't want to say purpose here, but like,
Yeah.
what am I doing here, really?
Yeah,
What is important
totally.
to me? And you know, people stuck in the grind, but they're like, I don't want to grind. I want to slow down. I want to enjoy. And like, I really just resonate so much with what you just said about even just slowing down, focusing on your kids. And like, and
Yeah,
I feel that now being a newer mom myself and just like, you know, it does, but you don't have to have a child to have those shifts, right? Like, there's a lot of
totally.
things that could come up in life that could cause us to just like reevaluate and shift things
Totally.
and losses of identity or changes in health or whatever. So so many different aspects can bring that about. But you have such a powerful devastating story when it comes to loss. So I would love for you to share a little bit about your sweet Ian and just his story, your story together, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Um, and then really just I'd love to have this conversation go to like how did you cope? How have you kind of gotten to the place that you're at? Not that it's not an ever evolving thing, but
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna try to do like the Cliff Notes version here.
No, this is never a simple
I
thing to
know.
answer.
It's like these are like the major points and so much behind the scenes, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so Ian and I met when we were 18 years old as freshmen in college. It was like immediate fireworks, romance, like head over heels, like this is my person. And we dated the whole 4 years. We took a break at the end of college to kind of go our own ways. And the reason I go so far back is because that is when he actually got diagnosed with cancer, when he was like 25, 26, like right out of college. And he was living at China at that time, um, kind of pursuing a career in hotel management out there. I was on my own path back here in the States, but ironically, that diagnosis is what brought us back together because we were both kind of like following our careers, but then we realized, you know, life is short. Be with the person who you love, I think, after he got his diagnosis. So we got back together after that. We got married. I'm so sorry, Miley. No, thank you. We got married. That is my cute King Cavalier who
Oh
loves
my goodness.
attention. We got married, we started a family, and cancer was still very much in the background. We had been going out for like treatments and radiation and whatnot, but we just thought we had it under control. I think in both of our minds, we thought, you know, we're just gonna treat it. It's gonna be done. Like, we're gonna beat this. And we really like felt that within our heart of hearts. We did not think of Ian dying as an option. Um, so it wasn't until the fall of 2017, after Izzy was 2 years old and I was pregnant with my second, that we found out that his cancer did actually metastasize. And the cancer that he had is called uveal melanoma. It It's really rare, especially for young people, and there isn't a cure. So we decided to pack up our bags, move out to Colorado, where we had more family, and pursue treatment at MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, which was like the experimental treatment route. So it was kind of like a Hail Mary, right? Like, we're going to try anything to try to beat this, but we really don't know. So at that time, like, my son was born. I was raising two small kids, taking care of Ian, flying back and forth from Houston to Colorado. It was just like,
Emily, how did
such
you do that? I cannot.
it's so crazy. Like, our
I know.
bodies are so wild. Like, when we're put into a
Survival.
situation where we have to survive, it's like we do. Was I like feeling anything? Was I process anything? No. But like, we were doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that went on for about 15 months. And then in February of 2019, it was kind of toward the end of Ian's journey. And he was just like, Emily, we just keep getting no's. It's not looking good. I feel like I need to go back to my hometown of Hawaii. Just because I'm afraid that if we don't go now, I won't ever get to go again.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we went there thinking that we would return back to Colorado to try more treatments.
Okay.
But I think once he got there, it was just, I don't know, like, I think subconsciously your body starts to be like, all right, it's time. He checked into palliative care. Palliative care turned into hospice. And 24 days after my son took his first steps, Ian passed away in hospice, in home hospice. We had a guardian angel basically give us a beach house for him to pass away in. And it was like a beautiful passing for what it can be, right? Like, I am so grateful for that. And then, gosh, I mean, in terms of where I am now, I think having the peaceful passing, being able to say goodbye, definitely supported me in my grief journey. It wasn't, I mean, it's always, I think there is a level of trauma in all of our losses. I think a lot of it was more the anticipatory grief that occurred. But I guess what my grief journey looked like, it was very surreal the whole first year.
Yeah.
I don't even think I really felt anything. Like, I was just kind of numb, dissociated.
Yeah.
And I kind of judged myself for that because I thought I should be a basket case falling apart on the floor in bed.
Yeah.
And that's okay if that's what, your grief looks like, but mine did not, because all of our grief looks different. Mine was very much like, all right, what am I going to do? Like, straight up survivor mode, lots of anger, lots of anxiety. And the way that I coped with those two big emotions, I didn't even have a lot of sadness the first year, was by going to the gym and moving through it, right?
Yeah. Literally moving.
Literally moving through it, like the energy. I was like, I need to get out. I also had two kids, so I learned how to ask for help, like, very early on. And it wasn't, it was more that like, this was a really hard thing for me to admit, but I didn't want to be a mom. I didn't want to be a mom to my kids without their dad. Like, I was like, I didn't sign up to do this alone. So I had a lot of anger and resentment around that. But luckily I had two really supportive parents and a community who was able to say, it's okay, Emily, do your thing. We got the kids, and so I would say my grief kind of looked like that for like the first 2 years. The anger and the anxiety started to subside. And as I released those emotions, more sadness came in as I began to like accept my loss. At that time, another really pivotal piece was starting my company Move Through. There's a massive loss of identity. I think in any type of loss, but for partner loss in particular, because your lives are so intertwined. I was like, I'm no longer a wife. I'm a mom, but I'm not the same mom who I was. I'm now a solo mom. I'm also now having to figure out how to be head of household and like the breadwinner. So it was like all of these new roles were coming down on me at once. And I think for me, in hindsight, it was easier to put a lot of my energy into my business than it was to like see my two kids without their dad, like it was almost like a subconscious choice that I made. And so I started my company Move Through, which was basically merging grief with fitness. Because at that time, all I wanted to do was talk about my loss. It was like, it just felt so big, so alive. So I started sharing my story online, started connecting with other widows. I started feeling less alone. And that, writing about it, talking about it, connecting, feeling seen by other people, and then turning it into a business to help others, like all of that helped me create meaning. So meaning making for me was like a huge pillar of healing.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have done it without it. And I know for some, meaning making comes a lot later in the journey, but for me, it was like I needed the light. I needed to see some good coming out of this horrible experience as like my lifeline to continue on. So I would say fitness, community, meaning making, were like my really big pillars of healing, I guess, that supported me to get me to kind of where I am now.
Oh my God. What a freaking journey.
And then there's a lot more, but I just
I'm
like
sure. I know so many little nuances, I'm sure. Um, there's so many things I want to ask you right now. Well, thank you so much too, also for like kind of like defining and going into like what you mean by like finding purpose and like finding meaning and stuff, because I feel like I hate to use the word triggering, but like I feel like some people are like, I don't I don't want to find meaning in this, or like what do you like that is never meant to take away from the loss. I think you even write about this, or you
Yeah.
mentioned something about this in your book, where it's like it's not meant to take away from the loss itself. It's not meant to, it's not putting a band-aid on it, right?
Right.
It's that is a process. And so often I mean, this was like part of the certification that you and I went through. It's just like there's like almost like a rediscovery that can happen as far as like, okay, like kind of like I alluded to in the beginning. Okay, we've been through like a massive transition, a massive loss, a massive whatever, in the form of quite literally a death. But then, as you were saying, like so many shifts in identity, and I'd love to like dig into that a little bit. But
Yeah.
um, and then from there, it's I think our perspective just changes. It's
Mhm.
like we don't necessarily like things that maybe meant something to us before, like not that they don't now, but it shifts, or you just realize like life really is short. Like I maybe
Mhm.
don't want to be here doing things that I don't want to be doing, or we realize how precious things
Yes.
and life truly is. Um and how it can just turn on a dime, even though it maybe is like a prolonged illness or something, either way,
Yeah.
like the second he died, like your life was never, not that it was going to be the same prior to that either, but like
Right.
that was really pivotal for you. So talk to me a little bit about, I mean, I can only begin to imagine that type, like that. I've been through anticipatory grief myself, but not
Yeah.
with a partner, and certainly not with kids on top of it. So, I mean, like you kind of mentioned, like you disassociated a little bit. What was that anticipatory like? Did you imagine your life without
Mm.
him? Like, I don't know. Just walk me through a
Yeah.
little bit of that. If you
Yeah.
can totally black all of that out, because I also went
No,
into that.
no, I know. I
But like,
definitely,
how does that even?
yeah, I would definitely future trip. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about anticipatory grief is like navigating the uncertainty of it.
Yeah.
Like,
It's like
I
the
think
in your
it's
face
just,
grief, but then you're like also trying to figure out like what the hell am I supposed to do when this officially
right,
comes to? And I know there's
right.
listeners here going through anticipatory grief. Like,
Yeah, and it was
yeah,
like I just remember I would like I have a journal entry of me where I'm like sitting there seeing Ian get a Ipi Nevo what are they called? Just meant or transfusion, I don't know, but he was getting
yeah,
medication and I just remember being like, all right, there's like three different outcomes here. He would get better. Obviously, that's what we all want.
right.
And we can go back to like, we can live our life with like a renewed sense of appreciation for it. And I would kind of play out that scenario and be like, oh, that'd be like amazing, right? And then I was like, we could still be here, like in limbo, like basically living our lives in between hospital visits. And that's the hardest part. It's like, well, is he going to be okay? Can we take that trip? Because is he going to have to, is he going to have a trip to the ER or whatever? Is he going to be around for Theo's next birthday? Just all of that, like uncertainty. And then the third case scenario was he dies. And yeah, like when I thought about the third case scenario, it's kind of funny because the first thing I would think about is like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to date again. That sounds horrible. And I would
Which
like,
I also want to get into, by the way,
yeah.
in a little while. But
But
yeah,
I just, it's funny in hindsight thinking that that's where my mind would go first. Like, oh, and
it though, like,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
know that probably, like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would imagine like that could feel so like morbid, but like I feel like that's just a perfect example of like not shaming ourselves for some of the thoughts that we have. Because like
right. Yeah,
so many people might hear that and be like, how could you even think about that? Blah blah blah.
I know.
Like, I'm sorry, like this, you're
It's
young, right? Like you're a
right.
young mom. You're like, I'm sorry, I'm not about to spend like the next however many
Exactly.
decades by myself. Like these are natural and normal thoughts. So I just want to also like share for
Name
anybody
that. Yeah.
feeling any shame around thoughts that they might be having. And like here we can like kind of low key laugh about it now. Like
Yeah.
just throwing that out.
Yeah, no, totally. But they like that's where my mind would go. And then I'd be like, oh my God, I don't even want to think about it. Like
Yeah.
rewind a bit, like come back to the now. But um I also think, Tara, that we were both in like kind of denial around his death.
Oh,
So
sure.
like I would kind of go there, but then I'd be like, no, 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 I'm not going to think about that. Right.
Yeah.
And again, in hindsight and in, unsolicited advice for anyone like listening who might be in the anticipatory grief journeys, like hope for the best and prepare for the worst, because I
Yeah.
wish that we had had more honest conversations about what life would look like without him around, not for me, but especially for my kids. And like, we had to have my dad, who is a doctor. I have a lot of doctors in my family. They were all kind of like, Emily, like, read the writing on the wall. Like, you need to get your will, your estate, like all that stuff in place. And I'm so glad that we did. Because I see so many families now working in grief who have to go through that and just like the extra heartache and suffering that it can create. So we had some, but we could have had more. And like we never had a moment where we embraced each other and cried and like really were able to like say our goodbyes. And I missed that. And at the same time, like hindsight is 2020. Like I don't know if Ian could have ever accepted the fact that he was dying. Like I did kind of ask him, can you write a letter? Can we have this conversation? What do you think it's going to be like? What are your wishes for the kids? And he'd push back and kind of get angry and say, Emily, like everyone thinks I'm going to die. I don't need you to think so too. And then I just kind of like ran away from it.
Like, okay, okay. Like, yeah, I don't
Yeah,
want to upset them. Like,
exactly. But what was cool is like putting my story out there and talking about this on social media. I had like hospice nurse Julie and hospice nurse Penny
mhm.
would weigh in. They're big on social media. And I remember them like responding to one of my videos saying, yes, like everyone focuses on the person who's dying and we're all tiptoeing around them. But what we have to remember is that the journey of someone dying isn't just about the person dying. It's about the person the people they leave behind. And thus it's a shared journey. And so I was like, wow, like that changed my perspective a lot on like how I
Yeah.
might have done things differently. But, you know, often we learn through experience, especially with something like this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean it's tough.
so
Like you can't go back and you're
right.
just we've talked a little bit about survival. Like you are just doing the best you can in the moment. And if
Hmm.
you know that and that is like for me where I try and give myself a lot of grace and permission now is like knowing that I was truly doing the best I could.
Yeah.
I had never been through anything like that before. I had never
Hmm.
lost one parent, let alone two or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
Yeah.
Like or that everything was that I was okay or that if I was escaping into work a little bit or I was like trying to just keep my head above water that was like not me being selfish. It was actually
Right.
like I was really doing the best I could not to like completely lose my damn mind. Like
Right. And like we had to be the person who we were and learn
yes.
those lessons to get to the version of ourselves who we are now. Right. Like I struggled with that for a little bit,
Yeah.
but then yeah, exactly what you said, like just so much grace and forgiveness and acceptance because we just didn't know any better. But your
Yeah.
brain can trick you into thinking that way.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
It's tricky. Yeah. Uh, Hey, my friend, are you needing some relief from your grief? If so, I have an exciting new offering that will help you get exactly that. My 14-day Relief in Your Grief challenge brings you powerful, impactful, bite-sized daily content alongside the perfect meditation. One of the biggest struggles I hear from my members, clients, and people on social media is that they just need some relief from the stress, sadness, and pain that grief and loss can cause. But here's the thing, so many people are lost and unsure about where to start. This can feel like a huge thing to tackle, so we are doing it together and we're starting with just 14 days. Give me 2 weeks and I will help you begin to take that anxiety, heartache, and anguish and turn it into peace, clarity, and hope as you move forward with your grief. Seriously, what do you have to lose by joining? Challenge your grief and give yourself some relief, my friend. I have no doubt this 14 days will be an inspiring, uplifting, perspective-changing experience for you. Join now through the link in the show description. Talk to me a little bit about, I just want to touch on your sweet kids and I mean, just that process, and because they were young, it sounds like. So like,
Yeah.
how did they process it? Did they really understand it? I know you touched a little bit about this in your book as well. And it's so poignant. Oh my gosh, like the day he died and everything. And we're going to talk about this book, but truly everyone, like, please go get this. Like you do such a beautiful job of like sharing your personal experience and your story and like, but in such a relatable way that like, even if, people didn't have this exact same situation happen to them, that they can like see parts of themselves in it.
Thank
But
you.
then again, it's just such a beautiful tool. So we're going to come back to the book, but I remember you mentioning
Yeah.
this part of the story. So like, talk to me about like just a little bit about like that day or like the days sort of after, and then just like since then, like how
Yeah.
has it been navigating this with two children on top of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, children's grief is like a whole nother
I wouldn't even know.
different like ball game, right?
Yeah.
And so I started getting like seeking out resources early on, like a
Good.
therapist and just learning about it. But really, children's grief is all about talking to them about the death in a way that's age appropriate and not trying to sugarcoat anything. So our approach was to be very matter of fact and
Mhm.
try to explain it to them in terms that they could understand and not using any euphemisms like daddy's gone to sleep, like it's daddy's dead.
Mhm.
His body stopped working because the cancer made him sick, explaining that cancer is not like a cold. It's not like something that you can pass on to people. It's really rare, so that they don't fear that they're getting
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
They're going to get it. Explaining to them that it's not their fault. It's not my fault. It's not God's fault. It's not dad's fault. I mean, the doctor's fault. Like
Yeah.
we all tried our best.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we just tried to make it try to like address any of the fears that might be
Mhm.
coming up for them. Like, mommy's okay, I'm still here. But I do tell them that, I'm not going to promise them that I'm always around. I mean,
Right.
even after Ian died, I said, most people grow to live to be 80, 90, 100 years, but it's not guaranteed. I hope that I get to be that long. If I do die, this is, you'll be with Gemma and Jampa or Uncle Danny, Uncle Patrick, right? Like
Yeah.
just normalizing
Reassurance and like
of
whatever
it,
we can give.
right?
Yeah.
Because I think that was a big thing for me. A lot of the suffering that I endured was because my entire bubble was burst. Like, this shouldn't happen to me.
Yeah.
32-year-olds don't die. And it's like, once that narrative, right, creates so much suffering when you actually, I mean, I thought I was the only 32-year-old widow alive
Yeah.
until I got on Instagram and started connecting. I was like, this is actually, yes, it's rare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not alone,
Yeah. Yep.
that's a different frequency behind that story.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
um, but yeah, in terms of like where they are today, we've kind of had to reprocess it every year. And I just kind of like check in with them. I just try to talk about Ian a lot so that they can get to know their dad in a spiritual way. We talk about him being in the moon and in the stars and different animals that come and visit us. I honestly believe that he came and visited me and my partner's family as a sea turtle when we all visited Hawaii. It was crazy. Like this sea turtle like came up to us like an old
Very
one.
intentional.
Right.
Like,
And earlier that day, I said, Ian, come visit us as a sea turtle. Like, and I was like, not a baby one. I want a big one. Like, I was very specific. And it was just crazy. So I'm trying to give them tools so that they can connect with him. And then and just understand who he was, you know, like talking stories, looking at pictures. Um, yeah, and I think like Izzy is who is now 8 definitely has a better understanding of death and the
Sure.
permanence, and she's realizing that her friends have dads and she doesn't, and so grief will occasionally come up for her, and I just try to sit with her, hold space for her, try not to like fix, just like we as adults don't want our grief fixed, we want it witnessed, and so just it's okay to cry, tell me more about how you're feeling, and yeah, just kind of creating space and normalizing the whole grief experience for them.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And that's so, I mean, to have to understand that or try and wrap your head around that at such a young age. Like I've talked about this a little before, but like, I've lost people in my family before. I lost a cousin at a very young age, like a grandmother and stuff. And so I think I grieve that as much as a 10, 11, 12-year-old could grieve something like that. But yeah, it's so hard. It's hard to wrap your head around the permanence of death and what death actually is as an
An
adult.
adult. Yeah.
Okay, 33 over here. And I still am like, okay, I'm trying to figure out what this
Yeah.
really means for me now because it literally affects you the rest of your life. And I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask, as far as like them seeing other people with or the kids with parents and that I can only imagine is hard. And it's just a testament to the fact that like these triggers or these
Yeah.
experiences that you witness other people having constantly thrown in thrown in your face.
Yeah.
And they're at such ages that like most children that age have not lost a parent, right? Like sure it
Right.
happens, but um, you know, yeah, just I don't know, like for most of us,
Right.
the younger you are, the more likely you are to have both parents. So just yeah, I mean, as a parent, what else are you supposed to do? Like I think
Right.
that's tough.
Yeah. And I'm trying to teach them the duality of like, yeah, it sucks that your dad's not here. Like I wish he was here too, and I've accepted it. And like, look at all the amazing things that have come from this. Like we're now, you have like David and his kids, and we have like a whole new family, and trying to teach them that like there's a couple different storylines at play and that they get to
Yes.
kind of subscribe to the one that they want.
Yeah.
So not getting into the mindset of like the victim mindset, right?
Yeah.
Of like it's
Yep.
like yes, life is unfair, and like look at all the good that can come from it if you choose
Yes.
to, I don't know, continue to move forward and create whatever you want. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a
Just like
duality to it.
yeah, like not like accept that, but just welcome it in. Like
Right.
just being open to it and open-hearted and open-minded. And I do see a lot of people with blocks on that sometimes, and that
Yeah.
there is not that open, but understandably so. Like, and again, and depending on where people are
Right.
in their grieving journey too. This is like someone
Totally.
listening here that's like very new, like for sure. Like, it's just
Yeah.
something that we have to naturally be open to with time, I feel
Yeah.
like. And it is not a process that can be rushed. It's not something that anyone else can force us into. We can't force ourselves into it. And honestly, it was like hearing conversations like this, or just like for me, it was actually because I really wasn't on social media in like in a griefy way, like back when I was like really healing from my parents' deaths. Like it took me a while, before creating losses become gains and getting that out there.
Hmm.
So for me, it was more like through like books and things like that I was able to open my mind. So it's and journaling and stuff. So it's, however we
Yeah.
can incorporate that into our life. But it's there is like an element, at least for me, of just like believing that like it can get better and it will get
Right.
better. And it's not that it's not going to be heavy. It's not that it's our grief is not always going to be with it's that living with it. It's, whatever, it's a day by day process.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the big one is like because our brain has been so trained to think like either or, I either need to be like deep in
Hmm.
my grief and like my life is over,
Yep.
or I'm not honoring my person, right?
Yep.
And if I'm happy, then it means that I'm abandoning them, right? Where I think you
Exactly.
learn with grief is that it's always a both and. It's like I
Yeah.
can be sad about my person and grateful that I'm still alive and hopeful that I like,
Yep.
that tomorrow's going to be a better day.
Yeah.
And that doesn't minimize the pain that I feel for losing my person.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned I wanted to get into the dating of it all.
The
So
spicy stuff.
let's get into this. Yeah, let's get into this too. So just talk to me a little bit about how you were open to that, how that unfolded for you, how you met David, all the things.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm probably more of like a fixer, like, and I'm also an Enneagram 7. I don't know if you do Enneagram stuff.
I
I
do, but I
tend
don't know like what they are off the top of my head.
I tend to just like gravitate toward like light. So like pain, I'm like, no, don't like go there.
Oh,
So
the same
my
way.
whole grief journey, I kind of see there's like a theme of like, okay, meaning making light. I'm gonna fix, I'm gonna find a guy and I'm just gonna make all this go away.
I'm very here for that mindset. Might be like a little. Oh
So
man, I know it's like
I
we're a
like
little bit delusional, but it's fine.
right.
Uh,
It's like it'll be fine. So I don't know, like I don't know if I consciously thought this, but like looking back, I kind of was thinking like, I'm just gonna find like a guy to take Ian's place and it's just gonna be fine. So I started dating like kind of early on and with that mindset in the background, but also just because I was really, really lonely. Like I just wanted to go on like a date. I wanted to be away from my kids. I wanted to get cute and like flirt with someone. I probably was craving some intimacy. And so yeah, I started dating around like I think I started entertaining the idea at like 4 months, but my friends were all like, no, that's too soon, which I think you're, so we could get into this whole thing, but I think it's like knowing what you're ready for
yeah,
as opposed to just saying like, it's too soon for anything. Cause I was ready to probably go on a date, not ready for like a full blown romance, but
right.
I was
Yeah.
ready to get out there and like meet people. So probably like 4 to 6 months time, I got on the apps, which I had
Mhm.
never been on a dating app before. And it was kind of funny because I would like get on the apps and be like, "Ooh, he's kind of cute. Yeah, like, oh, this is kind of fun." And then I would like put it down and I'd just like start crying. Because it would like it would be like the act of like getting on an app was like another signal to me that like my husband was dead,
Oh,
So again, duality, like you can be excited in a second and then just like devastated that you're having to be on the app in the first
it's
place.
even your reality in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah. So I dated around, I met a guy, dated him for like 3 months. He dumped me and I was like devastated because this guy, like, I was really excited. Like I had this like, started future tripping already. He gave me like the butterflies that Ian gave me. And I was like, oh, it's gonna be okay, And then like
There's hope.
boom, like dumped me over a text message like right before Christmas, like my first Christmas without
Sure.
my dead husband. It was really brutal. But it was like the best thing ever in hindsight because it just helped me see the void, right? That I
Yeah.
was trying to cover. It like
Yeah.
dating was a band-aid and it really forced me to heal on my own. I think since then I have gotten a lot more. I would say first I learned how to love myself. Like
Mhm.
I realized that I had been dating from a place of loneliness, so I figured out how to be good on my own, how to
Mhm.
love my alone time. I basically tried to work on myself to get to a place where even being as a mom, as a businesswoman, that I could be good on my own and that I didn't need anybody else. So
Yeah.
that was really important to me. So I was dating from a place of desire as opposed to need. And I
Yes.
was then able to attract guys that were also in that same
In that
space in
frequency.
their life and that
Yeah.
frequency. Yeah.
Oh, I love
Um,
that.
so yeah, I met David 3 years ago on an app and we dated for like 2 years and then just last year we moved in together. um but it's hard. It's hard dating as a widow. It's hard to navigate grief while you're dating. Like it's like oh hey, like it's my husband's like death anniversary, like just like learning how to talk about grief, learning how to talk about death with people who aren't familiar with grief. Like I remember on my first date, I told someone my husband died and it felt like a bomb dropped. Like he didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what to say. And I got then really triggered about it and felt really insecure. But in hindsight, um, I, you know, I give him so much grace and compassion because it's like he probably didn't know what to say,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
Most people don't.
Most
Like,
people don't.
that's
And
what we're learning. Yeah.
I was probably just insecure in where I was feeling, right?
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
um, but there's a lot of different nuances. Talking about grief, talking about death, how to honor your person when you're in love with someone new, right? Like making sure that the jewelry that you wear with their initials and the pictures around the house, like, doesn't make them feel like they're competing with a ghost, right? Like, so there's just a
Yes.
lot of conversation that has to happen, a lot of grief education, a lot of openness and compassion on both sides. But yeah, I mean, I could go into a lot more, but that's kind of like the overview, I would say. I think early on it was hard for me not to compare people to my late husband too.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I had to really get clear on like who I was, what I wanted, what I needed in a partner now. And
Yeah.
that's still kind of a learning process. I mean, I think for
Sure.
both David and I, him coming from a different experience of loss, right?
Yeah.
And learning what our needs are, where we're compatible, where we're not, and trying to get as much into alignment. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's beautifully said. And that I'm glad you brought this up because I did want to ask you about that. Like, how do you navigate, openly talking about Ian and like having him around and like, which is not only important for you, but for your kids, of course. And like
Yeah.
how David has been okay with that and come to understand that and just, yeah, like not feel like you said it perfectly, like competing with a ghost, basically. And just,
Right. Yeah.
like honoring both without stepping on either toes. Like, so it's just
Yeah.
like
And
in
that's what we say, like
conversation, like really just talking.
it's it's constant. And I think where so I work with a dating coach and we have a dating course for widows. And we talk about because I think where some grievers get it wrong is like there's almost this sense of entitlement. Like, well, if he
Mhm.
doesn't honor my person, then like it's a hard no, right?
Right.
That's a
Yeah.
red flag. But you got to be honest with yourself too. If you're in a relationship with someone, then you have to kind of consider their needs as
Yeah.
well as your own, right? So it does become a conversation.
Yeah.
And so for me, like early on, certain pieces of jewelry, like I had to wear,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But later on in conversation, like with David, like he's like, that's really hard for me to like see all the time because I feel like you're not really like
Holding on to him or
with
even,
me, you're holding on with him and it's like interfering with me. And I was like, you're
yeah.
right. Like I kind of get that. So I was able to hold space for him. And then I asked myself, how important is it for me to wear like these earrings? Do I need to wear it?
Mm.
Does it minimize my connection to Ian? And at that point, it was okay for me to be like, I don't need these right now. Right.
Yeah.
But then there's other things where it's like, I do want some visible photos of Ian in the
Yeah.
house and with my
Yeah.
kids. And like he is always a huge part of our lives, right? So then I say communicate that that is something that I need, right? So it's just a back and forth, like with any
Yeah.
relationship.
Compromise. Like
Compromise.
any
Yeah.
marriage, like any relationship. It's like
Right.
this is like some serious added layers of complexity.
Complexity.
And like this is not like, always a typical, relationship married couple thing, but just like anything else, you find ways. And I'm so glad you mentioned like the tangible things too, because it has been a process for me
Yeah.
letting go of my parents' physical things. And I
Hmm.
always I always remember my mom, she would this is ironic now that she's dead, but she was like, you can't take it with you when you go. And but she's so right. Like here and you know what? I know this is just me. I'm not trying to pose this on anybody else, but I know with my parents, they'd be like, Tara, you can get rid of it all. We don't care. Because it
Yeah.
is just material things.
It
It's
is.
more for us at the end of the day, probably than it is for them. They're not here hanging out with us in the
Right.
physical world anymore. They got other priorities wherever you choose to believe that they are. So, and it's all in due time is what I've found as well. And like
Yeah.
you will know. I think this is such a beautiful like gut check and like getting in touch with our intuition too. Like we'll know when we're ready to get rid of something or not
Yep.
because you will
Yeah.
you'll like you said, you're like, okay, like I love how you asked yourself that question. Like, can I let this go right now? Or maybe not get rid of it, but just like, do I need to wear
Hmm.
these right now? Do I need to wear
Yeah.
these every day? No, okay, I'm not ready to get rid of it. I'll never maybe get rid of it, but like
Yeah.
maybe just wear it if you're really missing them that day or something, or there's just
Totally.
something that you just need to feel a little bit closer because those tangible items do help us feel
They
closer to them
do.
sometimes. Like, let's be,
They,
but do we need to hold on to everything? Can we hold on to everything? Probably not, right? Or like in my parents' situation, I had literally a whole condo of stuff, and I'm like, I
yeah.
listen, I gotta, get rid of some things here. Um, but it was a process, and it was
Yeah.
constantly checking in with myself, and it was like with time, there were some things I'm like, okay, I don't need 16 pairs of my mom's shoes. Let me just whittle it down to 3, and just like the cute ones or the ones that I remember her wearing or that had the fondest memories, and let me like donate the rest and feel good about that, and like
Right.
I think of like Marie Kondo. I'm like, does this spark joy? Okay. It still does, but I can part with it. Okay. I'm grateful for what it gave me and what it gave my parents and lovingly let it go. And it's so
Yeah.
that's a whole nother thing that we could get into.
Yeah, seriously, you could do a whole episode on just what to
Literally
do with
just
the loved one's
the things.
belongings.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just, yeah, it's a process. It's an evolution. And yeah, there's so much noise, I think, that we have to, I don't say like cut out, but just weed through, right? It's our
Yeah.
own noise, it's our own expectations, it's the things that we tell ourselves based on what we think or feel we should be doing versus like societal expectations or norms or
Mhm.
whatever, versus literally what other people are saying, or like your friends, like 4 months is too early. You knew in your gut that you were okay. You were
Right,
ready for
right.
that. And you knew
Yeah.
that it wasn't, like, because everyone could have a different opinion on when you should start dating. Some people would be like,
Yeah.
3 years minimum. What are you
And
talking about? Or some people like, it hasn't even been a year yet. It's like these
right.
crazy timelines. And I'm like, who made these up? Like,
Totally. And I think it's hard in grief. I just want to name this really quick because I
yeah.
think when you lose someone you love, it kind of rocks your sense of confidence
Oh, totally.
because,
Yeah.
confidence comes with repeated action. And when someone
Mhm.
dies, it's like everything about your world has changed. So
Yeah.
everything's going to feel new. And I think
Yes.
often
Totally.
for grievers, we end up going outside of ourselves to look for validation, approval, permission, advice, instead of coming back to ourselves.
Yeah.
And like I look back at like the past like 3 to 4 years, I hired coaches, I hired therapists, and all of that was great. But like what I wasn't doing was like actually coming back and being like, wait, but like what about me? How does that feel for me? And
Mhm.
so just like invitation for anyone listening, like you really, really do know. And just it's harder though to trust yourself after you lose someone because your sense of confidence is shot. And I think pieces of you are like missing, like the identity. It's like, it's just, but I think if you can like start to connect with yourself like earlier on, like,
Yeah.
man, like that's another like lesson in hindsight. I'm like, yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
good.
For real. I tell people to like, I've talked about this a little bit before, a little on the podcast, and then just like in general, it's just like that alone time
Mm,
can feel very lonely and it's
yeah.
very isolating, but it's very, very raw, but it's very humbling. And I've said this
Hmm.
before, like that was by far the worst part of my grief was being in that aloneness.
Yeah.
But I needed it. I needed to like
Mm,
turn
yep.
off the TV, or I mean occasionally listen to watch shows that brought me even just like a little bit of laughter. But like, and kind of get to know myself again and get like,
Yep.
I'm sure this was a process for you, getting to know yourself.
Totally.
Like you talked about loss of identity, getting to know yourself without your husband.
Ian.
And like,
Hmm.
and for me, it was getting to know myself like parentless,
Yeah.
basically. And sitting with myself. And I didn't discover meditation right away, but it was just that sitting in silence. It was, like I said, reading books that were really inspiring, journaling, because I'm like, well,
Yeah.
these are my raw thoughts. Like here they really are.
Totally.
Um, and yeah, and so for you too, it sounds like movement has been a massive part of your like healing journey and just releasing of things. And
Hmm.
yeah, so and that's something it sounds like you impart on others as well. And
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely mentioned that too.
Absolutely.
I'm like, oh my gosh, just getting out for like a 10-minute walk a day, like just getting that
Yeah.
fresh air. Because we can be
I
so succumbed to just our couch if
I
we
totally
let
agree.
ourselves.
I love that you say name this, Tara, because I think that alone time, like it's like we don't know how to be physically alone,
Yeah.
and it takes time to get used to. But like, instead of being like, I'm so like alone and lonely,
Mhm.
it's like reframing it and being like, yeah, but how can I use this alone time to
Yes, like
heal and like do that inner work? Because I totally agree. I think that was the first time that I actually started like noticing my thoughts
yes. Which are
and like,
scary, to
which
be
I'm
fair. Like
sorry.
it is like a really scary thing to actually hear. I see why people numb themselves or they just disassociate or they don't want to because it is very dark. Sometimes the things
Right.
that come up, I get it.
Yeah,
But
but
it
that's
is
like the path.
important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pivotal. It's not always fun work to do. Like, I'll
I mean,
just
that's
yeah.
consciousness. It's
Yes.
right. It's like instead of being like running our lives on automatic programming systems, it's like
Yeah.
looking at our thoughts and being like, oh, that's why I'm showing up this way. And that's why I'm
Yeah.
feeling this way. And it's like, I think it's the path to freedom. I honestly do. It starts right there
For sure.
with the awareness. Yeah.
Yes. Beautifully said. Real quick interruption here, and then we'll get back to this episode. If you're someone who is experiencing some form of loss and are trying to navigate the complexities of grief, which you likely are in some capacity if you've stumbled upon this podcast, then this message is for you. If you haven't heard about my Life with Grief membership and community yet, this is truly something you need to check out. This membership is here to guide you into living a deeper, more meaningful, and full life after experiencing loss. Who doesn't want that, right? I created this membership because I know what it's like to navigate and cope with grief on a daily basis, and I know the tools and support it takes to do this effectively. I've done the work myself, and I've coached people just like you to do the same. It comes down to having impactful, effective resources and tools at your disposal, having the right support around you from people who can understand and empathize with your grief, and having encouragement and inspiration around you consistently to not only elicit and spark change, but to keep it and keep the positive momentum going. Enrollment opens once a month for a limited time. Check out the details linked in the description, and I hope to see you in there. Okay, so this is actually a perfect segue into your book, which I want to just touch on in the last few minutes here, because one thing I remember you writing here was about like curiosity and also getting curious about your grief. And I think that's just a beautiful segue. So for those who are actually watching this, here she is. Well, my Zoom is blurring this.
Thank you, Zoom. It looked like it's censored.
But here we go. Okay, back a little bit. So first of all, it's also just like the most beautiful book. I don't know who did the cover, but it's like stunning. And I just love it. Move, grow, and thrive through grief. And I love the word thriving because, again, so many people I feel like are like, nope, I'll never thrive again. What is even joy? What is even happiness? What is life? So again, and you say it here perfectly, every grief journey is different, but we all need reminders. And this book, like I said earlier, it just really touches on so many aspects of grief and the common things that people can think and feel. So really, like, no matter what your grief and loss journey looks like, there is something, this sounds so cliche, what I'm about to say, but there's something in this for everybody. Because it really, there's so many, like I've said this before, there's so many like overarching things that we can all sort of universally feel. And I think that's what brings people together too, right? Like, yes, I've lost different people than you have, but like so many of the things that we've talked about or that we've addressed, we're both feeling it. We've both felt loneliness in our own way and things like that. So talk to me just a little bit about like how this book came to be. And there's honestly so many things about this book that I want to get into. And I know we like, just for the sake of time can't, but yeah, just talk to me a little bit about how this came to be. And also you mentioned here the 6 C's of grief, which I think is just like a great place to sort of like leave people with today too. And just like talking about that, because I really, you all need to get your hands on this book to like really get into it. Cause you talk about the power of connection. I mean, and the way that you break this up into really like digestible parts and sort of like, just how to even start moving through your grief, is a really important message. So anyway, once again, starting just with, I know just asked like 5 questions in there, but just how this even came to fruition and what inspired it.
So after I started sharing my story on social media, I guess let me backtrack. Writing has always been extremely therapeutic for me. Like it started out with like writing GoFundMe updates when Ian had cancer, and people would always say, I love your writing. These updates are so helpful. They're making me appreciate like my life in a whole new way. So then I started a blog from there, and then I started sharing on social media. So writing has just always been a thing. And I would say maybe around like year 2, I wanted to write a book. Because like I had started growing a social media following, people were saying I'm a good writer. Like I needed that.
It does help hearing people say it. Come on,
it gives you some it boosts your confidence. Yeah, and I just felt like I had like this message that needed to be shared. So I hired a book coach. I did like the 30-day book writing challenge. I was totally in it. I had like a whole other kind of idea for the book at that time. And I don't know, like it just kind of fell by the wayside, and I ended up not working with the coach. I just let it kind of go on the back burner. I think I kind of had my coaching business taking off at the time. So I just shifted more into that side of like what I was doing. But
Right.
then maybe like a year later, I had already announced it on social media too, by the way. I was like, I'm writing a
I'm
book.
writing a book.
And then it was like radio
I know.
silence. um, but then anyways, yeah, an editor slipped into my DMs and was like, hey, I noticed that you're writing a book. I've been following your posts. I really feel like you have a book in you. Would you be interested in talking? And I was like, oh my
Would
God,
I?
absolutely. Like this
I
sounds
was.
amazing, right? So it was just like I feel like it was like the universe, right? Being like, this is the time.
Yeah.
You have the experience, like
There was
it's
ever
all
a
right
sign.
there, right? Like, so we talked about it. We didn't really use like the first my initial idea, but I think I will end up using that at some point.
Mhm.
They wanted they wanted a grief book, and they wanted to do something that was kind of like more self-help, digestible, really
Right.
beautiful imagery and stuff. So I loved
Mhm.
that. Like all of what their idea for the book really spoke to me. And what I said is I just want some of my story in it because
Yeah,
the whole way that I have learned through grief has been through experience. So
absolutely.
by
And people need
me
to hear
making
that.
right and
Yeah.
like me making a mistake and then like deriving the lesson from it, like that's like
Mhm.
been my entire journey, and that's what's given the harder failures, right?
Yeah.
Failures, obstacles, challenges, meaning is by like learning and growing from them. I mean, that's
Right.
kind of how my whole journey in meaning making began. So I was like, I
Yeah.
need to have my story woven in there.
Sure.
And, I had already done like all of the different programs. Like she had looked at my website and she was like, I love how you have like move through, grow through, thrive. So those were actually like all programs that I had done for my clients.
Hmm.
And so the book was basically me taking everything that I
Right.
had taught in my courses, learned as a grief educator, also the Dharma coaching, there's a little bit of that kind of towards the end, right?
Yeah.
But just like any of the tools, the insights, even just quotes that I had written down in my journal, I
Yeah.
pulled and I like put in there. And I just kind of tried to make it as like, here's a buffet of different options for you. Like
Yeah.
this worked for me. Feel into what resonates and works for you, right? And even if it's
Mhm.
not in the book, like get curious about what else could work for you.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of how the book came to be. I basically, I wrote it in about like 6 months. It was literally like all right here.
Yeah. Just
All
brain,
and
like
I'm
literally
yeah,
almost
all
like
in my
brain.
brain. Like I had it
Yeah.
all right there and it just like flowed right through. And then the 6 C's came to be because I just felt like I wanted to create some common themes. Like if you didn't want to read the whole book and you just wanted to look there, like what are some things that I could like tease out? And like
Yeah.
so these are like kind of like the six like pillars
Yeah.
that I have found really supportive in my grief journey, but also just in my continued healing journey and
Hmm.
growth journey beyond. And
Yeah.
so what is it? It's like curiosity,
Yeah.
community,
Hmm.
consciousness,
Yep. Coping,
compassion,
coping skills,
coping
compassion,
skills.
and compassion. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
Yeah.
honestly a lot of what we've talked about today. So it's like,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a great place
Yeah.
to start, but there is definitely so much more obviously to get into with all of these, which you do, and you also, I mean, talk about some very, like literally one of the headlines, my person died. Now what? It's like that's like and just getting into that and like, the things that you talk about grief myths and like, is this normal? And like all these things that we've, kind of briefly
Right.
touched on today
Yeah. Yeah.
to even start. But one thing I love that I would just wanted to call out, and again, we could totally dive into this entire book, but I think just such a beautiful thing that you had brought up was like becoming your own grief guide. And I've
Yeah.
said this before to people too, and I say it to my clients, you're not going to have me barking in your ear every, I'm not there 24/7. So we
Right.
really do,
Yeah.
we are coaches, like there, we can help people along, but like, what about the other you know 23/7 hours of a day? Like
Absolutely.
what then? And we do have partners or children maybe or jobs, and like we have other things that we have to do, that we have to focus on. And so like I've
Yeah.
definitely found in my grieving journey, like you do have to compartmentalize whether you want to or not, or whether it's easy to or not, like so I just the way that you just are realistic with the expectations of all of that. And again, trusting yourself, giving yourself permission, honoring your feelings and emotions. And I love this, breaking down harmful misconceptions around grief that will ultimately add to your suffering. And,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
again, there's so much to dive into there, but really, like, again, if anybody can take away anything from today's episode, like, it's that. I hope, and it's just being very patient with this process and doing things very much like on your own terms. But
Yeah.
there is, I think you and I definitely operate from a place of like, there is light at the end of the tunnel. You can actually see the tunnel here if you look over here in this corner.
Right.
It is there, I promise you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so much of that, we've talked about this, it's like it's our mind, it's our mindset, it's reframing, it's getting curious, it's asking the hard questions. And sometimes it is really nice having a guide or a coach like
Yeah.
use those questions for, because it's hard to do that reflection with ourselves if we're not
I, yeah.
trained to do that, right?
I totally agree.
Yeah,
And even just being in a group, and maybe it's not even being in a group and just having somebody else who's like
just
maybe in a similar
reflect.
situation, but kind of handling their grief in a different way, or they may have a more like optimistic mindset or something, but it's
Mhm.
like just seeing that kind of shifts something within you, and it
Yeah.
might just spark a little like light bulb and be like, that's interesting that they're able to do that. And instead of being like, oh well, what's wrong with them, it's like get curious, shifting
Yeah.
criticism to curiosity always, right? Like, well, that's interesting, I wonder how they're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't, I always feel like these things don't come up for no reason. Like this book did not
Hmm.
come up for no reason. Like I really feel like it was meant to be put into the world when it was, because
Yeah, me
it's a
too.
needed resource, or just like, maybe people hearing this podcast episode need to hear some of this right now. And I've said many times, like there were things that were perhaps I was too early on in my grieving journey to hear or to be
Totally.
receptive to, but I needed to keep hearing these things to even believe that the hope was there,
Right.
that
Yeah.
progress could be made, that I would not be this lonely or this lost or this
Right.
confused or this sad or whatever
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because like I know we're like running out of time, but like I think I talk about triggers in the book, and it's hard when you're in the beginning of grief and you're getting triggered all the time. It's hard to like regulate your nervous system and lean into a trigger. But I always say like triggers are the invitation. And I think I read about
Mhm.
it somewhere. It's like
Mhm.
if you're getting triggered, that is like a main invitation to get curious about it,
Yeah.
because that is like your
Yeah.
map to something that's unresolved within you.
Yes.
And I think it was David Kessler who like taught
Yeah.
me that. Yeah,
He's amazing.
he's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the stuff that activates you the most is like where the healing resides. And so if you're getting triggered by something, it's like, oh, okay, that's fun. That's interesting.
Not.
Let's see what that's all about. Now I'm thinking, I'm like, where am I getting triggered in like my relationship right now? Where I need to like
Yes, right. Yeah, you can apply this to so many
you
parts
can
of
apply
your
it to
life.
so much. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. This
So
no, seriously. I mean, we again, we can laugh now. Grief does, open us up to want to and need to like explore things like that, but we really can apply so many of
oh
the
yeah.
coping tools and so much of this healing in other aspects of our
Yeah.
life, our job, our relationships, things that just don't feel like I think you
Totally.
and I both have really we're in this like phase, this era of like alignment and what feels good
Hmm.
and what feels right and in all aspects of life.
Yeah.
So, I invite everyone like, when you're open to it, like using your grief to explore, just to get curious like we've been saying.
Yeah. Grief
Yeah.
has been a big, big teacher for
Yeah.
sure. It's like opened up. I mean, now that I like really think about it, it's like
Yeah.
what brought me into consciousness, into
Yes.
coping skills, like self-love, like all of it, because that as a means of survival. And like I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like it's horrible to lose someone, and like I trust that like this is what my soul needed. Like
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
evolve and to grow and to continue on its path of truth. And I believe that Ian is here with us. And
Totally.
yeah, it takes a while to get there. And if it feels triggering, like that's okay. Lean into it, feel it. Like we're so afraid
Yeah.
of the pain, right?
Yeah.
Um, that's also easy for me to say 5 years out. So
I
honor
know I
where
always
you're
forget
at,
to like preface
grace and
things.
compassion. I know it's always hard. I'm like, yeah,
I
you got to
know.
meet people where they're at. But
Yeah.
just I think just trust, right? Like trust that there's light to come.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's such a beautiful way to end this conversation. I seriously, Emily, we could talk for hours. We already
I
know. We've done an
know.
Instagram live before too. It's just like, oh, there's so many beautiful aspects that we could dig into here. But I think that's a beautiful message to leave people with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where can everyone, this will all be linked in the show notes, of course, but where can everyone find you to follow you, potentially work with you, all the good things?
Yeah. Just Emily P. Bingham. I'm on TikTok and I'm on Instagram. The book is on Amazon, Love and Grief. My website is Move Through Grief. But there might be a little rebrand coming on, so I'll let you know.
Okay. We'll go follow along, obviously, for any fun updates. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time today. I knew
Yeah.
this was going to be a beautiful and transformative conversation. I just hope everyone can just, again, like you said, we're meeting people where they're at with grief. And I think
Yeah.
just, yeah, we are a little bit further out at this point, but like I said, just hearing these little snippets, I always
Yeah.
joke, like, keep this in the back of your head for later, maybe, or revisit this episode if it was a little tough to hear some of this right now. But
Totally.
I mean, just what you have created. And I've said this before, like, it's not like we have to create these like grief empires with
Right.
with what
Yeah.
we've done, but this was our path, and it's very interesting. And I'm going to ask you this super quick before we leave. I had someone ask me this very like poignantly. It was a nice way that they asked, but they were like, "Do you feel like, how did they word this? It was like, do you feel like your parents' deaths have like led you to the work that you're doing now? Like, do you almost feel like it was sort of like meant to happen for you to like sort of find
Yeah.
your soul's purpose here?" And I'm curious because we've both been
Yeah.
through this particular education. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you
Yeah,
want to share that a
I
little bit?
I love this question. Like I have chills as you say it because I
And I'm
what I
glad I
want to
asked.
say is that when Ian first died, I would have said, fuck no, Tara.
Absolutely. Same.
Like I was like closed off to all spirituality, closed off to God, like any of it.
Like, don't come at
And
me right
yeah.
now.
So it's been like year 3 is when I first started like opening the doors, like through signs and just, synchronicities, like wanting that connection, talking to a medium.
Yeah.
But just recently, like I think after taking the Dharma coaching certification, and so the idea of your soul choosing a path, right?
Mhm.
And that everything is kind of fated and it's kind of this like co-creation with the universe. But like
Yeah.
I remember hearing that and being like, all right, I don't know if I believe that, but I'm gonna just get curious about it and stay open
Yeah.
to it. And as I've continued my spiritual exploration, I'm like, I can feel it. Like I always say with clients, I'm like, it starts in your mind and then it starts to like go into your body. And like, as I'm like saying this, I like feel like the passion. Like I'm like, absolutely.
Feel that energy too. Yeah. That's amazing. You
Yeah.
you can't ignore it. And you really do get lit up by it. It is
Yeah.
expansive,
Mhm.
and grief and everything can be so contracting. And so I know that's like one thing that we learned a lot and felt a lot and stuff. And so when
Yeah.
you really tap into that joy, all of this growth and the
Yeah.
purpose, or the, meaning finding and everything after going through something devastating, like if you
Yeah.
are really getting into that, you can, like, quite literally, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, bring it on, and there's an openness that perhaps wasn't
Yeah.
there before, or, it's just worth exploring and tapping
Do,
into.
do you believe that? Like, where are you in that belief?
I, I kind of do, honestly. Yeah. I would, my gut reaction when they asked me that was actually like, yes, I actually sort
Yeah.
of didn't hesitate.
Uh-huh.
But, with the caveat that like, I don't like almost having it worded like, yeah, they were meant to die for this to happen. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
the wording rubs me. Eh. But I am getting comfortable with the idea of like soul contracts and like,
Right.
that this was, again, I'm really careful not to say like this was meant to happen. But the fact of the matter is it did.
Yeah.
So you can really ultimately choose like how
Right.
you want to navigate it, how you will navigate it, how you cope with it, how you let it affect you short term and
Right.
long term. So
Right.
yeah, there's something
Can,
there's
can,
something to it, I feel like.
can I offer one thing that's
Yes,
helped
oh
me?
God, of
Because
course.
I felt that too. I was like, well, why would Ian have to die for my soul to get to like the next level of its evolution? That feels like kind of fucked up, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
But like, so what's helped me, and I talked to my therapist about this, who's amazing. She's like, well, if you take morality out of it and
Hmm.
see death for what it is, like
Yeah.
you don't look at a forest fire burning and then be like, oh, it shouldn't have died so that the regrowth could happen. It's just a part of the evolution of life.
Yes.
And so seeing
Awesome.
death, if you take the morality out of death and see it as like, It just is. Like sometimes like
Absolutely.
my husband dying at 32, like that was his time.
Mhm.
And right, like and not making a story of like how it was unfair. It's just that we all are on different timelines. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's been kind of a new
Love that.
that kind of unlocked some stuff for me to be able to just accept like it literally all just is. And there's some sort of like a divine rhythm to all of
Yeah.
it. And
Yes. I love that.
how can I see all of life like that?
Yeah.
Not make any of it like wrong or right or
Right. Or there
bad
I
or
have to have a meaning behind that so much, or like, because I do see comments about that, or I do see,
yeah.
I see a lot of that on social media, or like, you know, people confused about that, or they are trying
Mhm.
to find, because death
It's
is
tricky.
confusing. And you know what I,
Mhm. And our
so
mind wants to make meaning out of everything. It wants to
yes.
create like a story. And so
Yeah, so like
to
taking
just
the
be in,
ego out of it kind of, and just
yeah,
like you said, it
yes.
just be, which is like so hard to do.
So hard. It's
like,
so
I don't want
hard.
to just be. I want to like have my person back. I get it. But you talk about it here. You mentioned the consciousness and part of it, and that is like a whole thing to unpack. But um
Yeah.
no, there is so much truth to that. And I love
Yeah.
that analogy too, actually. That's yeah, that's beautiful. Again,
Yeah.
these reframes,
I know.
these
We need a
mindset
part
shifts,
two. We need a
they're
part two, girl.
powerful. I know. Real talk though. Yeah.
If we have time
Thank
in
you
our
so
schedules.
much for everything today. I'm
Yeah.
glad we kind of just had that little last
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm like so there right now. Yeah. It
yeah,
was great.
yeah, that was meant to come up.
Yeah.
I feel that. But no, seriously, thank you so much for your time today. I have no doubt everyone listening here can walk away some very, very impactful little nuggets of wisdom. Everything that you mentioned will be linked in the show notes. And I love chatting with you.
I know you
You're
too,
so fun. You're
Tara.
just a
Thank
ball
you.
of light, and I love
Same.
it. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tara.
I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined, to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.